Okay, basically what I have is, when I did the study the other night, David was offering, he was pointing to some verses having to do with bringing forth sin, or bringing forth for trouble. That's a verse I'm going to share in a few minutes. And we want to try and compare that with bringing forth children, right? Bringing forth children. And let me see if this is going to post. I may have to break it up. These are some of the verses that he was offering. And basically looking into the idea that bringing forth, that or those that are barren and are not bringing forth, they're not bearing, is it possible that they're not bearing sin, or they're not bearing for trouble? Here's another verse, James chapter 1 verse 15. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, bringing forth death. And so I think what he's looking at is this Strong's reference here, 5088, and you notice that there is sin in James chapter 1 verse 15. It is associated with sin. Now, if we're just looking at the Strong's numbers, the Strong's references, and that's why sometimes I hesitate to use them too much. There are times when I can compare the referencing, but if we're not picking up the exact context or the proper thread, they could be misleading, I think, to some degree. Because take a look at Hebrews chapter 11 verse 11. Through faith also Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed, and was delivered of a child. Now that's not the same type of bringing forth that we see here, is it? On the one hand, one is bringing forth sin, and over here one is being delivered of a child. And we see the same picture in Revelation chapter 12 verse 12. And she, being with child, travailing in birth, and pain to be delivered. Okay, so that's the Strong's reference right there. And basically what he was saying is, let me go ahead and post this. We also read in Isaiah chapter 54 verse 1. This I have to break up. And he was offering the same tie-in there, actually a different Strong's reference, 03205, and also looking at the idea of those who do not travail with child. So we have in Isaiah 54 verse 1, Sing, O barren, thou that didst not bear, break forth into singing, and cry aloud, thou that didst not travail with child. For more are the children of the desolate than the children of the married wife, saith the Lord. But you know, the one thing that I'd like to point out is that even though here we're talking about bringing forth sin, but at the same time in these verses there is one other aspect that's in view, and that's bringing forth child, right? Bearing children. Jeremiah chapter 30 verse 6, Ask ye now and see whether a man doth travail with child. And the reason I'm posting these verses is just to show that here we're talking about being delivered, right? First of all, well, no, not that verse. Isaiah 54 verse 1. Thou that didst not bear, 03205. And now, if you look at Jeremiah chapter 30 verse 6, whether a man doth travail with child. And I think the focus here really is the idea of bearing children. And the same is in view in Genesis chapter 3 verse 16. So the common thread or the common denominator that I see is that for the most part, the idea of bringing forth is usually attached to children, bringing forth children. Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. Okay, now some of the comparison that he was making is when you look at the Strong's reference 02342, right? And what he is offering there is that thou that didst not travail with child. And I think he's trying to make a connection there, which is reasonable, right? He's trying to make a connection that the travail with child would be the same as bringing forth sin or bringing forth children. Now here's another verse that he was sharing. This verse right here, Jeremiah chapter 23, verse 19. Behold, a whirlwind, and the Lord is gone forth in fury, even a grievous whirlwind. It shall fall grievously. That's the same word, travail, that we see in Isaiah chapter 54, verse 1. Break forth into singing and cry aloud, thou that didst not travail with child. Okay, so that's interesting, because in another verse, again over here, Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 23, he is offering, behold, the whirlwind of the Lord goeth forth with fury, a continuing whirlwind, it shall fall with pain. And he's also suggesting that this is tying into Jeremiah 23, verse 19, fall grievously, pain. So that when we talk about bearing forth or bringing forth, that there's a possibility that this could be talking about what we read in Isaiah chapter 54, verse 1. I'm just sharing the verses that he offered, and then I'll try to share some of the verses that I was able to pick up, and Lord willing, to see whether or not the same picture is in view. And then again in Isaiah chapter 65, verse 23, they shall not labor in vain. That's another verse that was offered. They shall not labor in vain, nor bring forth for trouble. Oops. That's not the... Alright, disregard that verse for now. I just want to pick up the latter part of Isaiah 65, verse 23. They shall not labor in vain, nor bring forth for trouble. Now you notice that in Genesis chapter 3, verse 16, God is not talking about bringing forth for trouble, but he's talking about bringing forth children, right? And if you look at Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 6, travailing with child. So the question is this the same? Can we link the two together and say that God here is talking about, when we read in Isaiah 54, rejoice, thou that didst not travail with child, is it possible that it's talking about the elect not bringing forth sin? Well, I think to some degree it relates to the tribulation, because the believers, although they identify with the corporate body coming into the great tribulation, they do not bring forth sin. In other words, they do not come under the wrath of God, right? Because their sins have already been paid for, and so they are able to come out of tribulation. But I don't think right now I'm not seeing the same picture is in view with the idea of bringing forth children, right? And I'm going to see if I can try to explain why. Psalm 29, verse 8, the voice of the Lord shaketh the wilderness, the Lord shaketh the wilderness of Kadesh. So again, you see, he's looking at the Strong's references, and that's why I mentioned earlier that sometimes I hesitate to be too insistent or dogmatic with the referencing, because they may be talking about, we might be looking at them in a different context. So here God is talking about a shaking, which is an earthquake, right? The Lord shaketh the wilderness. The Lord shaketh the wilderness of Kadesh. And then again in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 26, whose voice then shook the earth. Now, I guess he is proposing here again because of the referencing, right? Strong's 02342. He is proposing whether it's the same thing we read in Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 23, fall with pain upon the head of the wicked, and Jeremiah 23, verse 19, fall grievously upon the head of the wicked. And here's another verse, Hebrews chapter 12, verse 27. So the connection there, and this word yet once more signifies the removing of those things that are shaken. Okay, so basically, as I said, these are some of the verses, and I'm going to post just a couple more that is trying to make a connection between these verses and Isaiah chapter 54, right? About those that rejoice, the believers, they rejoice, they are barren, and they do not bring forth. So is it possibly saying that they're not bringing forth sin? They're not bringing forth for trouble. They're not bringing forth with pain, right, in connection with the shaking. All right, and here's the last one. I'm not sure how these tie in to the other verses, but I think 032:05 is one that we looked at. Yeah, Isaiah 65, verse 23. They shall not labor in vain, nor bring forth for trouble. That's the same word. They bring forth, though they bring forth, yet will I slay even the beloved fruit of their womb. Hosea 9:17, my God will cast them away because they did not hearken. All right, now let's take a look at the other side, which is what I offered in the study, Woman in Travail, and that is the idea of bringing forth as it relates to bearing children. And I think in the context of the Great Tribulation, Lord willing, we'll see that it has to do with bringing forth a man-child, and that would be the language of salvation, right? Because the man-child, the elect body, coming out of tribulation, now it's a new body, it's a new woman, it becomes Jerusalem above. We read in Genesis chapter 30, verse 22, and God remembered Rachel, and God hearkened to her, and opened her womb. And she conceived, and bare a son. Now that's the same bearing that's in view, I believe, in those other verses that I was sharing. And bare a son, and said, God hath taken away my reproach. And I think that's an interesting statement, because if you look at Joel chapter 2, verse 19, we get a little bit more information insofar as what the reproach is all about, right? Joel chapter 2, verse 19, yea, the Lord will answer and say unto his people, behold, I will send you corn and wine and oil, and ye shall be satisfied therewith, and I will no more make you a reproach among the heathen. So I think the idea of bearing a son here in order to take away the reproach would be the language of salvation, those that are not coming under the wrath of God. And but it's because they bring forth a son, right? And I think that's very important. They're not bringing forth sin, but they're bringing forth a child. In Judges chapter 13, verse 3, and the angel of the Lord appeared unto the woman, and said unto her, behold, now thou art barren, and bearest not, but thou shalt conceive and bear a son. Now, I think these verses are taking us in the direction that when the believers came into the Great Tribulation, they were considered to be barren. They were not bringing forth. They were not bringing forth children, just like Leah, Rachel, right? At some point, God shuts the womb, and there's no more children, there's no more blessing coming forth. That's a picture, I believe, that God is giving us when we look at the Great Tribulation, the believers coming into tribulation. And now, if we see the connection between Judges 13 and 3, now we look at Isaiah 54 verse 1. Sing, O barren, thou that didst not bear, break forth into singing and cry aloud, thou that didst not travail with child. So I think what we're looking at here is that coming into the Great Tribulation, the believers, they are barren, they're not bringing forth prior to the command to come out of Babylon. For more are the children of the desolate than the children of the married wife. Now it's interesting that when God was dealing with Leah, remember Leah, she was hated, and yet she turned out to be the one who produced or who gave birth to more children to Jacob. So I think that that's pretty interesting. And now we look at Isaiah chapter 62 also in verse 4. Thou shalt no more be termed forsaken, neither shall thy land any more be termed desolate, but thou shalt be called Hephzibah, and thy land Beulah. For the Lord delighteth in thee, and thy land shall be married. And the same is in view here again, I believe, in Leviticus 26 verse 22. About those that are desolate. I will also send wild beasts among you, which shall rob you of your children and destroy your cattle, and make you few in number, and your highways shall be desolate. Now we know ultimately the unsaved in the churches and congregations, they become desolate. And they too, if we look at the other side of the coin, they are said to not bring forth. They're said to be given a miscarriage, so they lose the child. They're said to bring forth. However, the children are devoured, are bereaved. They are bereaved of their children because they are born to the murderers, right? The thieves, the unsaved in the body. And also, I think in other verses, God simply says that they do not bring forth children at all. So a couple of different scenarios and pictures that doesn't mean we have to have one direct answer. We just have to look at, Lord willing, each verse and the context of the verse, and as well as see how it relates to the whole Bible, and then hopefully see the language of judgment and salvation. Lamentations 1:16. For these things I weep, mine eye runneth down with water, because the Comforter that should relieve my soul is far from me. My children are desolate. And again, I think because of what we read here, the enemy prevailed. The unsaved in the churches. Remember Satan at the beginning, he exalts his throne above the stars of God. And that's the time when Jerusalem is desolate. She's not bearing, she's not bringing forth. The womb has been shut because the whole body is under the wrath of God. And then, even though they are barren, right, at that time, now they rejoice because God remembered Rachel, right? God is going to remember them and cause them to bring forth, because the days of the tribulation have been, the days of the tribulation have been cut short. Now we see a very direct connection here, I think, also in 1 Samuel 15, verse 33. And Samuel said, As thy sword hath made women childless, so shall thy mother be childless among women. And I think that it's the same picture is in view there. Now if you want to look at the difference between bearing sin, bearing for trouble, and bearing children, Numbers chapter 18 verse 22, neither must the children of Israel henceforth come nigh the tabernacle of the congregation, lest they bear sin and die. And I think that's the idea of bringing forth for trouble. Those who bear sin, they bring forth iniquity, which causes them to come under the judgment of God. Very, very interesting. And that's why what I'm proposing here is that this bearing, hold on one second, Tony. I'll get to that in a second. This bearing seems to be a different bearing when we look at the idea of actually bringing forth children, right? On the one hand, there is bearing sin, where the unsaved, they come under the wrath of God, because now they're still bringing forth trouble, and trouble has to do with tribulation. They're bringing forth iniquity, which causes them to come under the wrath of God, and versus the idea of bearing children, where the child itself becomes a picture of salvation. Tony posted. I was going to offer the concluding verse, not verses, but summary on this, but I think I've said quite a bit, which, Lord willing, should make the distinction. Bearing children could also be a picture of those that bring the gospel and someone becomes saved. Well, yeah, exactly, Tony. When we look at the, individually, as a matter of fact, that's a good point, because I was talking to a friend of mine, and she was offering some verses, and what I suggested in the study, A Woman in Travail, is that the womb appears to be the birthplace for both wheat and tares. Remember, there were twins in her womb, and two manner of people shall be separated. I forget exactly who that was. Was it Sarah? Two manner of people would be separated. The one shall be stronger than the other. So I believe anytime, those that are coming into the churches and congregations, or the church body, basically Jerusalem is giving birth, right? We see a very interesting verse that the wicked are estranged from the womb in Psalm 58. The wicked are estranged. Psalm 58 verse 3. And I don't believe that this is in the context of the Great Tribulation. I think this is, as long as the kingdom exists here on earth, there are those that identify with Satan, those that are called but they're not chosen, and there are those that the believers, they identify with Jerusalem above. But you see, the actual separation, the body is not redeemed until the body first goes through the tribulation, and then God begins the separation. So yeah, I agree that bearing children, anytime someone becomes saved, God is actually bringing about someone, the Jerusalem is bearing. As a matter of fact, that's a very interesting point, because there are some verses in the book of Job which I'm still looking at. They're not easy verses to understand. When Job begins to talk about, wishing that he had died from the womb, how is it that he comes out of the womb, right, only to see travail? And that would not be the case of a believer coming out of tribulation. So I think that might have something to do with those in the churches and congregation throughout time, right? Even in the Old Testament, those who come into existence, and they end up under the wrath of God, right? By nature, those who come into the body are under the wrath of God until they finally God makes a separation. The believers, the wheat and tares, they come out of the believers come out of the Great Tribulation. I always found it interesting that Paul would compare him bringing the gospel to a woman and travailing with child. Do you have that verse by any chance? And I'm also looking at Galatians chapter 4 verse 19. My little children, of whom I travail in birth again until Christ be formed in you. Yeah, that's another verse that we looked at the other day. This verse, I believe we can tie into the that's the one. Yeah, we can tie this into I believe we can tie this into pre-depart out, right, as I was just mentioning. And also, this is a passage that ties into the Great Tribulation, I believe, the depart out. because the idea of Christ being formed in them, I believe it applies both on the individual level as well as the corporate level. When someone becomes saved, they are sealed. Christ is formed in them, but they're not actually redeemed from the body until God brings about the separation. And at that time, we're looking at the corporate salvation. We're looking at the group, the fact that now the body is actually being purified, the body is being made born again. So I think that that's how we would have to understand these verses, Tony. But yeah, that's a very interesting statement. Let's see. So basically, travailing, I see right now to be synonymous to tribulation, pains of death, due to the sin of the church body, right? And the elect that are not bearing, they're not bringing forth for trouble, would seem to point to the idea that they do not come under the wrath of God because they come out of tribulation, right? So they're not bringing forth trouble. They're not under the wrath of God. They're not in tribulation. They're not bringing forth iniquity. And that allows them, that's because Christ has already paid their sin debt. And that allows them to come out of tribulation. However, when we talk about travailing or bringing forth and bearing children, that, I believe, is the language of salvation, right? We read that some verses in the book of Revelation. The woman brought forth a man-child. That's salvation. That's coming out of tribulation. How about the idea that they are barren because the door is shut? Well, that, I believe, would have to be talking about the unsaved in the body. That's what I was saying earlier, is that there's another picture that I think God gives of those that are not actually, they are barren. They're not bringing forth at all. And that would be the wicked, because they do not come out of tribulation. They come under the wrath of God. But if you have a specific verse on that and you want to post it, go ahead. But the unsaved are not the ones who bring the gospel. The unsaved, well, of course they do, Tony. The unsaved, they bring the gospel as well, because they're a part of the church body. Right? Not talking about the unsaved in the world, talking about the unsaved in the churches, in the church body. God also refers to them as the wicked. And they're part of the woman, right? Jerusalem that is in bondage with her children. Jerusalem below, that's Hagar. They do bring the gospel. They're not blowing the trumpet today, right? Because they're not coming out of tribulation. But yeah, they identify with the woman. They identify with the corporate body. And the fact that they're not bringing forth means that they're not coming out of tribulation, I believe. Alright, so the primary focus seems to be that the elect do not bear being desolate, right? Being desolate due to the characteristics of the Great Tribulation. That's what I said earlier. Because of the Great Tribulation, given the nature of the tribulation, they are desolate. They're not bringing forth. They're not bearing children. They are childless, is another way to look at it. They are said to be childless, but insofar as coming out of tribulation, they bring forth a man-child. They bring forth a man-child. So again, a very quick summary is that I was basically comparing bringing forth sin or trouble with bringing forth children. And I think even though there might be an indirect connection, because someone bringing forth sin, they may be bringing forth children who are identified with sin, right? And I think I picked that up when I mentioned that the unsaved in a body, sometimes they are said to be, they are said to bring forth, but the children that they bring forth, they too, they end up under the wrath of God. The children are bereaved. But I think there is a definite distinction, though, when we consider the nature of someone who is barren coming into the Great Tribulation. All right, that's all I have. I did say this was pretty short, and Lord willing, I'll wait and see. I'm not sure if David is inconvenienced tonight, whether or not he will show up. If not, then we may have to postpone that. But until then, we're still open for discussion or correction, or move into another topic altogether. Yes, Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, real brief. Just the point I was trying to make is that the elect are desolate during the Great Tribulation. If we think about that, if the door is shut, like the Apostle Paul was bringing forth children because he was preaching the gospel, and it was the time of salvation. But if we think about that the door is shut, and the elect are desolate, they're no more bringing forth children like the Apostle Paul was, and that was the only thing I was suggesting. That was pretty much it. It's just kind of hard to write and get the idea across.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're trying to relate here. Are you wondering how is it that they can bring forth if the door is shut, right? As far as coming out, we talk about the sealing of the 144,000. Yeah. Well, I think it's because, and that's a very important point, an interesting statement, because salvation, I see the Bible to be revealing salvation from two vantage points. There is the salvation on the individual level. You and I become saved, or anyone else, they are sealed, and they are under the care and keeping of Christ, even though, the wheat and tares are growing together. But when God is talking about bringing forth in the context of coming out of tribulation, it is salvation. It's a group salvation. Yes, exactly. The difference between individual salvation and the corporate salvation. So when we talk about the believers coming out of tribulation, it is a corporate salvation. So the whole body is born again. The body is bringing forth. Now there's a separation. It is New Jerusalem. And that's how I believe we'd have to understand that. God is He's not necessarily looking at the salvation that is produced on the individual level, right? But rather how it relates to the fact that God is no longer hiding His face from the church body. And this is what allows the believers to bring forth. The body brings forth. They bring forth a man-child. So the body comes out of tribulation. And I hope that makes sense. Is a man? Okay, Elizabeth. Yeah, you can go ahead, Elizabeth. I'll come back to the Tony's question here. All right, Elizabeth writes Matthew 18:20. For where two or three are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them. Question: are two or three in this verse spiritually speaking of the elect that God is gathering together today out of great tribulation? That's an interesting question. I think the first of all the two and the three. I know we normally talk, we think in terms of the number two, the church body, and certainly I think there is that's also in view there. Uh, I think this verse might be true even prior to the separation during the church age, two coming together, the church body. Christ is in the midst. Remember, there was a time when God would no longer be in the midst. So I think today it would apply only to the, as you say, the elect body, because God is not concerned with the unsaved body anymore. So yeah, it would still apply to today, the two or three, and I think those numbers could also be pointing to salvation as well. The fact that the body comes out of tribulation in the context. Yeah, I was always puzzled by that. How is it, two refers to could be referring to the church body, and yet God is still talking about the number three. The number three is also in view there. But I think we can reconcile that, as I said, if we see the spiritual nature of the number two and the number three in the proper context, and certainly it would apply, today. It is salvation. God, of course, He is in the midst. He is in the midst of the elect body, right? He is. Christ is together with Him. The unsaved, no. They have been cast out. Did you still have another question or follow up? I see your hand up still. Oh, okay. All right, but yeah, very interesting question. Don't be afraid to take the mic. If you want to take the mic, sometimes it makes it easier to, to speak or make reference to other verses. All right, but anything else? Any other topic or? I'm trying to think. Let's see. Tony, you raised something about the latter rain the other day on the Yahoo forum, and I posted a link to a chart looking at the 3 seasons of rain, and it's been a while since I looked at that chart, and I'm not sure if there's anything on there that needs to be revised. Did you get a chance to look at that, or is that pretty much the way that you are seeing the seasons? Not quiet. Oh, okay. Did you want to talk about it, or you want to save it for another time? There is David, Mr. Hunter. Good to see you. Actually, David, you like that, huh? A little butterfly. That's the MSN logo, I think. Um, yeah, I just went over the verses that I was talking to you about the other day. We can, there not a lot of verses. We can uh, go back on those later on tonight. Um, but go ahead, Tony. Mike is yours. Tony, did you want the mic? You can go ahead and pick up.
Yeah, briefly on the chart, the way I see that the early former and latter rains is the early rain would uh, be signified by the atonement, or when he went to the cross on Passover. The former rain would be Pentecost, when the gospel went forth into all the world, and then the latter rain, to me, is a picture of the final, the completion of our salvation when we get our spiritual body at the end.
Well, actually, I think that that's what I have on the chart. Because I remember looking at some information Mr. Camping had introduced and looking into the verses that he offered. That's what I was seeing at the time, but I'm not sure. Like I said, I still have to go back and double check to make sure that there's nothing that would alter the conclusion that I offered there. Uh, so yeah, the early rain or the very first, the first of the first fruits seems to be pointing the Christ going to the cross. The early rain, Pentecost, because if you notice, prior to every rain, there's a season of drought, and then today, when we talk about the latter rain, the drought would have to be looking at the famine, right, that comes on the whole body in tribulation, and then the depart out would be the latter rain. All right, David. Yeah, I'm just about getting ready to give you the mic, so we'll wait for you to come back. So that's the way that I'm looking at the chart, and if you double check, you might see it might be a little confusing because of the way that it's set up, that I have it presented. But I think it's saying pretty much what you're referring to right now. So I still have to go back and look at it. All right, we'll wait for. It's almost 10 o'clock. Um, Give me 1 second.